The car thermometer was reading 2 degrees when we drove through the frozen fog down Tolwong Road. It was so cold we hadn't been in a hurry to finish breakfast in Berry. So it was 11 o'clock when we started down the track and immediately hit the first obstacle. 2 years after the big bushfire, the access through private property is still closed because of the fires. So off we went, skirting the private property, swimming through a sea of acacia saplings, trying not to trip over the fallen timber from the big fires. It was cold, it was wet, and it was a big relief when we dropped into the side creek that leads into Mile Creek. The sun had come out, it was much easier going, we were cheerful. The creek dropped down slowly, easy walking, a little bit of scrambling. We stopped for lunch.
A very quick break.
And just after that, in front of us, we saw the creek opening out where it drops down a series of big waterfalls, almost 300 meters, into Ettrema Gorge itself.
Wow. Now you got to get your handholds and turn face.
So that will go the stairs where your right foot starts. So I'm going to stay right there with...
Yeah, we are moving.
We lost the light when we reached the final waterfall in Mile Creek, which has a scary down scramble. So we followed a tip from Jeff, headed up onto the ridge on the true right, and followed the ridge down to Ettrema Creek itself. This was actually pretty easy going, pretty straightforward. Once we reached the main Ettrema Creek, we had to hunt around for a while to find anywhere flat enough to pitch a tent. But eventually we found a couple of decent flat areas in a side channel, and soon Sam had the fairy lights out, we had a fire going, and we were all extremely relieved and cheerful. We cooked dinner, Samantha making a fantastic dessert for everybody, and sat about chin-wagging under the fairy lights until it was time to go to bed. Next morning dawned cold and clear. After breakfast, we had superb coffee prepared by the red-throated coffee warbler, ground after lots of experiments to make it perfect for a camping coffee filter. Really good, best coffee I've ever had on a camping trip. Then we decided to go back up Mile Creek and have a look at the waterfall that we chickened out on the day before. Literally only a few hundred meters back up the creek, we turned the corner into this little canyon-like section, sidled around on a ledge, and there in front of us was a truly spectacular and beautiful waterfall. So this is the last waterfall on Mile Creek. In the summer it would be the most magnificent place for a swim. On the right is the scary ledge that we weren't prepared to sidle along the day before. It's only maybe 10-20 centimeters wide with handholds above it, and doing that in the dark when you've never done it before with a big pack just seemed like a bad idea. Here's a film of a friend of ours doing it a few years ago. A lot easier in daylight, a lot easier when you can see what's coming up with the next foothold. Back to our trip, we sat here for quite a while admiring this beautiful spot. We were hoping the sun would come onto the waterfall itself, but it never quite did. And then we packed up and set off along Ettrema Gorge. The casuarinas have suffered many floods. They all have extraordinary rocks embedded in these tangled roots. Very beautiful. Water was crystal clear. We had neoprene socks in our boots so we could plunge basically wet foot down the creek. The only way to make reasonably fast progress is to do it wet foot. We were making good progress. In front of us we could see the valley starting to close in for the real gorge section of Ettrema Gorge. And that's when we were going to reach our next interesting obstacle, the bit where you have to wade through deep water. You can see the narrow part of the gorge there, just in front where the trees are. It didn't look that deep, but it was. In fact, it got quite deep indeed. Chest high on the guys. We were genuinely cold after that. The water was freezing. A little more than chest high on some other members of the party.
Just keep moving, you're nearly out.
This is Sam basically floating. After this, we placed a very high priority on getting into a nice sunny patch where we could warm up again, and pushed on down the creek as fast as we could. There are these tough as nails casuarinas holding on. Just as the sun was starting to go down, we walked into a nice campsite near the bottom of Transportation Spur. Again, we soon had a roaring fire going on the sand flats, drying our wet feet, setting up the fairy lights and settling in for a lovely evening around the campfire. The stars were spectacular. But eventually, it was time for bed. Next morning, as the glow hit the cliffs again, we packed up, warmed our hands around the fire, and of course, enjoyed more of Sam's spectacular coffee. There's the water boiling for coffee. And then this beautifully engineered, ground to perfection, cafe quality, barista service, coffee all round. Now it was time to put out the fire, fold the tents, and head up Transportation Spur, back to the top of the mountain. This was perhaps the most spectacular green pool that we passed. Just beautiful. The bottom of Transportation Spur is marked by this extremely pretty waterfall and some big tangled fig trees.
Just like I'm up a staircase.
Yeah.
With a few extra challenges. See the top of that big tree there.
Gully.
Pardon point.
At Pardon Point, there's an easy scramble up through the rocks. It's a little tight to push a pack through, which is why we're pack hauling.
Oh, guys, I actually don't know where I'm headed.
Are we right?
Yeah, this is a message, isn't it? Seriously, guys.
He's in my blood. Yeah. Nice.
Where's Jeff?
But just through the crack, up the other side, and we were back on top of the cliff line. Time for a nice lunch. Beautiful views back into Ettrema Gorge, where we'd been for the last couple of days. So much more to do down there.
Huh.
So packing up, we head to walk back to the car. Some brilliant navigation from Jeff, sticking close to the 700-meter contour line, contouring around the heads of the gullies, meant we could do quite a lot of the walking on these open rock platforms, which made for very fast going. Sometimes, however, it was necessary to push into the vegetation, couldn't do the whole thing on rock, and towards the end of the trip we were back to swimming through saplings. Eucalyptus saplings this time. Then, blessedly, we popped out from the sea of green onto the road,
So, great job.
from where it was a quick walk back to our start
no, it
point.
wasn't as bad as I thought it might have
Back
been.
at the cars about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A fantastic trip.